There. I don't know why I find that strangely soothing. I hope you do too. How are we doing real life? Yeah, pretty good, pretty good. Happy 4th of July weekend. My name is James Brown. If we haven't met yet, I serve as the transition pastor here, as Bob mentioned. And if you are new today, I just want to personally welcome you. I'm so glad that you are here, especially this Sunday, because we are right in the middle. We've turned the corner on a collection of teachings that we have called Won't You Be My Neighbor? This is actually a 5-week playlist on what you might call the art of neighboring that was inspired not by Fred Rogers, although that would be great, but by Jesus. And in the first 3 weeks of this series, we've covered a couple of very powerful principles about how to best be a good neighbor. And to glean those insights, I have spent dozens and dozens of hours researching what God and other people have said about what neighboring should look like. And so today, in week number 4, I want to share with you my big conclusion of all the research, all the study that I've done, my big conclusion about neighboring, which is this. Neighboring would be a whole lot easier if it wasn't for the people. True story, right? That's the problem, right? It's the people. It's the people as our neighbors who make engaging with them so stinking difficult. In other words, it would be easy to love our neighbors if it wasn't for our neighbors, if it wasn't for the fact that they were people. I think the title of one book says it best about neighboring, that everybody's normal till you get to know them. And that's true of all of humanity, but it's true in the Bible as well. In fact, if you start reading right at the very beginning of the Bible, you'll quickly find out that statement, that title of that book is very accurate of the people in the Bible story as well. For example, right at the beginning, you've got Cain killing his brother Abel in a jealous rage. You have Noah getting drunk, passing out naked, and then waking up to curse out his kids. You've got Lot, who gets drunk and impregnates his 2 daughters. You've got Abraham's 4 baby mamas who are constantly warring with one another. You've got Isaac playing favorites between his 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. And then you have Jacob lying to his dad and stealing his brother's property rights and his inheritance. You've got Reuben, who didn't just invent the sandwich. He also hooks up with his stepmom. You have Judah, who's tricked and ends up getting his daughter-in-law pregnant. Now, keep in mind, what I just listed for you is all just literally from the first book of the Bible. That's who's in there. No doubt these people needed some serious therapy, right? I mean, some dysfunction going on. I mean, you think your neighbors are bad, try and live next to one of these guys. It's not a good story. Which is why one of the famous Christian authors writes this. He says, why does the writer of Genesis include all this stuff? Well, there's one very important reason. The writer of Scripture is trying to establish a deep theological truth. Everybody's weird. Everybody's weird. In fact, turn to somebody sitting next to you and say, you're such a weirdo. Let's just get it out in the open. You're such a weirdo. Some of you are enjoying that a little too much. Okay, enough. It's turning weird. Yeah, everybody's weird. Everybody's weird. Everybody's flawed. Your neighbors have issues, and guess what? You do too. You do too. So do I. We all suffer from what theologians call depravity. We are the products of the fall. We're born into this world, and we're stained by Adam and Eve's original sin. And we see this in, for example, Isaiah chapter 53, verse 6, that says this: all of us have strayed away like sheep. We have left God's path to follow our own. We see it in places like Romans chapter 3, verse 10 and 23, where it says, no one is good, not even one. For all have sinned, all, includes all of us, all have fallen short of God's glorious standard. And it's this depravity that makes loving people so difficult to do. Yet, loving, depraved, not normal people is what God does call us to do. For the follower of Jesus, love is at the very top of our job description. Love is what we're here on this earth for. And that's what we've been looking at the first 3 weeks of this series. That Jesus was asked one day, somebody came up to him and said, hey, boil down for me what this whole Bible thing is all about. The entire message of what they called the law and the prophets, all 613 commandments in the Old Testament, all of that teaching, Somebody said, Jesus, boil that down for us. What's the big idea from that? And here's what he didn't say. He didn't say, don't worry, be happy, man. That wasn't how we summarized it. What he said was this. He said, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is on par with it. It's equally as important. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's from Matthew chapter 22. Jesus said that the big idea of the whole Bible, the whole thing, is really all about one thing. It's all about love. It's all about loving God, and then equally as important, loving your neighbor. Jesus says it's a package deal. It's not an either-or deal. It's not a both-and kind of thing. The vertical and the horizontal have to work together to make it work. Which maybe you're thinking, well, I don't really want to love my neighbor. I like the first part, but my neighbor is a big fat jerk. I'm not all about that. Or I don't want to really love the people around me. I mean, they're not that great either. I just kind of want to love. I just want to love God. Well, the thing is, the Bible never actually gives us that option. It's always communicated as a combo deal. And if you have no compassion for others, if you have no love for others, the people in your neighborhood, the people at your work or at your school, or even who attend this church, if you don't have love for those people, compassion for those people, God says, well, we better check our Christianity. If I don't love others, my faith is faulty. No love for others equals no love for God. And if you think I'm exaggerating that point, just look at a couple of verses I just pulled from the Bible. 1 John chapter 4, verse 8 says this, but anyone who does not love God does not know God. If you don't love, John says you don't know God, for God is love. 1 John chapter 3, verse 14 says this, if we love our Christian brothers and sisters, it proves that we've passed from death to eternal life. But a person who has no love is actually still dead. You see, love is the test. It's the litmus test for whether or not we are spiritually alive or spiritually dead. And without genuine love and compassion for other people, our faith could be in the fiction department of the bookstore. It's not real, because anybody can just claim to be a Christian. We know that. We do that. Anybody can sound spiritual, but unless there's a real compassion, unless there's a real concern for other people, we're sort of just kidding ourselves. And I would say that the reason the Bible can make such a bold claim like this is because when the Bible talks about love, it's not talking about some warm or fuzzy feeling that we have. It's not talking about this thing that you can fall in and out of. It's not something that you dish out only to those who you deem deserving. But rather, when the Bible talks about love, it talks about it as a decision to give other people what God has already given to us. Love flows out of the grace that we've been given to people that don't deserve it either. It gives it to those who can't and many times won't give you back anything in return. And just so we'll always know what that kind of love looks like, Jesus presented us with a powerful picture of that kind of love. He shared a parable with us, which is a story. He told a story that was so significant, in fact, that it has gone on to become one of the most iconic stories of all time. So famous, in fact, that even people who don't believe in God, even people who aren't part of a church or even like the church, even people who don't read the Bible or even believe the Bible, they know about this story. It's that famous. And they believe or use the ideas that are in the story, even though they don't believe the book in which it's contained. And we've been looking at this story, this parable, for the last 3 weeks, and we're going to finish it off today. So, if you would join me, if you have a Bible with you or a Bible app, I want to invite you for one last time to go to Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10. And we're going to pick up this parable. We're going to see the story that Jesus told that has gone through history to us today, that illustrates this idea of what it means to love your neighbor. So Luke 10, chapter 30, starts this way. Jesus replied to what? Who replied to the question of a religious leader, who is my neighbor? That was what he was replying to. Jesus replied with this story to that question. He said this: a Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him up, and they left him half dead beside the road. Verse 31. By chance, a priest came along, and when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. Verse 32. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Verse 33. Then a despised Samaritan came along. Yeah, there we go. That's from last week, sorry. A little hissing there. Ooh, this is where the story gets a little controversial. A despised Samaritan came along. When he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Right? Oh my goodness, this guy, this despised Samaritan, right? He felt compassion. And what we noticed last week was that the thing that the Samaritan is doing is that he's actually noticing this man. He's actually seeing him with eyes of compassion. And then verse 34. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and he took him to an inn where he cared for him. And this is where we kind of see the next stage of what love looks like, neighborly love looks like. It engages. It makes contact. It just doesn't look from afar, but it begins to get the hands dirty a little bit. And then verse 35. The next day, he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man, and if his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you next time I'm here. And then this is sort of the last place we looked at last week, that love also sacrifices. That when you do this thing right, there will be a cost to that care. So, in other words, to summarize what we've learned so far, what does neighborly love look like? We now know the answer. Neighborly love looks like the Samaritan. It gets involved. It gets involved. It notices. It engages. It sacrifices. It gets involved. It goes into the ditches of life where wounded people are and then offers them a helping hand. And I'm here to tell you that kind of love is not effortless. It's not effortless. And I hate to burst the bubble here, but you're not always going to get the warm and fuzzies when you do this kind of thing. I'm guessing the Samaritan here didn't get all warm and fuzzy while this guy was like bleeding all over him and all over his stuff. I'm guessing the innkeeper at the same time wasn't exactly thrilled that a half-dead dude was getting dropped off at his door, which is why that kind of love is a decision. It's a decision that gets made. It's a choice that you make. And that kind of love for your neighbor is also going to be quite costly. Neighborly love can have a financial cost. Neighborly love can have an emotional cost. It can be costly physically. It will cost you time, and it will have an opportunity lost cost. So, against the backdrop of that reality, I've got a couple questions about this story. How does it work in real life? Maybe you've been thinking about this or reading through this the last couple weeks, and you're maybe asking the same kind of questions I'm asking about this. Like, is this kind of commitment to neighbor love endless? I mean, does neighborly love require us to give to every need we see? Does neighborly love require us to start handing out blank checks of time and of energy and of emotion and money? Does it require us to hand out these blank checks to the people all around us who are hurting? In other words, is neighborly love unlimited in its expectation? Is neighborly love limited in its application? And I think at the first glance in this story, it seems like the answer is yes. But you look a little deeper into the story, and it's pretty clear that the answer Jesus gives is neighborly love unlimited in its expectation application? That the actual answer to that is no, that it's not unlimited. In fact, what we're going to see today is that although neighborly love sacrifices, it sacrifices selectively and sensitively. Even though neighborly love sacrifices, it sacrifices selectively. It helps at least one, but not necessarily everyone. And it helps sensitively. It figures out when helping is helping and when helping is not helping, when it's hurting. In other words, lastly, love notices, love engages, love sacrifices, but also love sets limits. It's discerning, it's calculating. It uses its brain because it recognizes that there are times when helping actually turns into hurting. Its ultimate aim is to love well by loving wisely. And without this last point, the kind of love that Jesus is showing us here would be completely out of balance. And I wanted to do this message in particular because some of you need to hear this. So some of you need to hear this part of the message because it's not an issue for you getting in the game. It's just knowing how to play the game that you're in when it comes to loving someone near you. Because you're loving someone and you're not actually setting any boundaries or limits with them. You may have a person in your life and you've been handing out blank checks to them emotionally, physically, with your schedule, maybe even financially. And if you were going to be really honest about it, you would have to say that your help, that your attention, that your assistance, that your aid is actually, at this point, doing more harm than it is doing good. Because they're still not getting better. They're still not getting better at it. They're still, after all of your help, they're still not making good decisions. They're still spending more than they make. They're still quitting as soon as the situation gets too tough. They're still getting involved with, they're still hanging out with, they're still dating, they're still marrying the same kind of person over and over and over again. And you have offered a hand time and time again, but it almost seems like they prefer to live life in the ditch. Because every time you've pulled them out, they found a way to crawl right back in. Or maybe for you, the individual you're trying to aid, you're trying to assist, has attacked and attached to you because they're a vampire. Not literally, but they might be a financial vampire or an emotional vampire. And if you don't detach from them, they will eventually suck your resources, your time, and your energy completely dry. You see, sometimes our loving another person is actually enabling them to stay in the unhealthy or the destructive pattern of behavior. And sometimes the most loving thing to do is to pull away and force them to face their issues or get some sort of professional help. You see, I think it's an interesting thing about this Samaritan, which is our model when it comes to our neighborly love. I think it's interesting that the Samaritan in this story, he had limits on his love. Yeah, he noticed. Yeah, he stopped. Yeah, he bandaged the man's wounds. Yeah, he took him to an inn and he paid for a few days of care. That's what he did. But notice what he didn't do. This Samaritan, he didn't reorient his entire life around helping this guy. Notice what he didn't do. The Samaritan didn't cancel the business trip or whatever trip he was on that he had to do the next day just so he could stay by this guy's side. He left the situation and he moved on. He also didn't take him to his home. He also didn't give him the keys to his camel, right? He didn't do any of those things. Or think about it this way. What if every day the Samaritan walked down the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, like the story says, but every day that he walked that way, there was a half-dead person in the ditch? Would he keep doing the same thing every single day? Bandaging him up, take him to an inn, pay for his care for a day or two? Would he quit his job to daily pick up half-dead people on the road? See, the correct answer is no. The correct answer is, if there is a systemic issue, we should try to do something to change the system, to try to do something to address the underlying condition that keeps causing half-dead people to show up in the ditch. You see, the reality is, you and I, we can't get into every ditch with every body. We can't bandage every wound. Our neighborly love, it has limits, so that we can go the long haul and continue to help people over time. And this is not harsh. This is not a harsh statement, because Jesus did this. In fact, if you read through the gospel story, if you read through his biographies in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, what you find is that he frequently pulled away from the crowds in order to reconnect in his relationship with God. That very often he had to unplug and pull away from the problems so that he could take some time to get filled back up by his heavenly Father. You see, neighborly love, it sacrifices for sure, but it sacrifices selectively, and it sacrifices sensitively. So love sacrificially, for sure, but also be discerning about when you need to pull back from that type of help. And I want you to know, I want you to hear me say that it is okay to do that when you need to do that. But when you are pulling back or choosing not to help, make sure that you're doing that for the right reasons. And to make sure that those reasons for limiting love are the right ones, I just want to offer just a couple of questions for you to consider. Ask this: am I limiting love for my neighbor by how much I love God? That maybe the reason you're limiting is because your relationship with God is not really that great to begin with. Because if I don't love God, there is no impetus, there is no reason, there is no motivation for loving anyone else, let alone that hard-to-love, jerky neighbor that you have. We love because he first loved us. Maybe ask this question: am I limiting love for my neighbor by how much I love myself? Because if I don't care for myself, if I don't make sure that I'm okay, then I'm not going to be of any use to anybody else. That's why Jesus says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Not just in the same way that you love yourself, but alongside it as well. Maybe then ask, should I limit love for my neighbor because how much love my neighbor can receive? You know, if my neighbor doesn't want to be loved, I can't force him. I can't force her to receive my love. Some people don't want our help, and that's just the way it is. And I would say in these situations, it's okay to heed the words of the brilliant theologian and philosopher Taylor Swift. And shake it off. And shake it off. That in these situations, it's okay to shake it off. I think actually she stole this concept from Jesus, who told his disciples in similar situations where you go to help somebody, they don't want your help, that you're actually to shake off the dust from your feet and just move on. Sometimes our neighbors can't receive the love that we want to offer, and that's okay. And then lastly, should I limit the love that I have for my neighbor because of how much loving I can humanly do? We are all only human beings, and our capacity for love is limited. We have a job, we have a family, we have a responsibility, we have things that occupy our time that we must do that keep us from loving our neighbor to the way that we think we might need to. You see, Jesus called us, and this, if you take anything away from today, I hope you take this. I think it's so important to recognize that Jesus called us to love our, here it is, listen to this, neighbor, singular, for a reason. He said, love your neighbor. He said, I will love the world, for God so loved the world. I got the world. That's mine. You love your neighbor, singular. And I think he said that for a reason. Because he knows we can't help everybody. We can't help everybody. Even if we want to, we can't because of our human nature. We're limited in who we are. But at the exact same time, we can help one. So I want you to take this statement away with you. This has meant so much to me, and I want to give it to you as a principle, as a maxim, as a directive for how to live this out in real life. And here it is. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Love your neighbor, singular. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. I mean, we live in a context where it's like, Jane, did you bring candy? Oh, did you bring candy for everyone? Like, you can't have it, you can't do it if everybody can't. That's not biblical. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. You want to help people? You want to help the world? Help one. Help one. Begin with one. Because there's no way that we can do it all. We can't love all of our neighbors, literal or metaphorically. We can't meet all those needs. We can't do it. We just can't do it. But we can pick one and start there. And then follow the lead of the Samaritan in the story and do for that one what you wish you could do for everyone. So as I wrap up this message, I just want to ask you just bluntly, plainly, who is that neighbor? Who is that neighbor that God is calling you, speaking to you, telling you who you need to love, that you need to love? Who is that for you? Who is the one that God is calling you to reach out to and help? Who is it? Who is it? Maybe the harder question then becomes, will you do it? Will you do it? You know? Recognizing that neighboring would be a whole lot easier if it wasn't for the people. Yeah. Yet loving, depraved, not normal people is what God's called us to do. Will you do it? Will you do it? Will you take that step? Not to love the world, but to love the one. And maybe the next step for you in doing that is beginning to pray a prayer like this. Let me pray this prayer. Dear Jesus, create in me the kind of heart that loves my neighbor the way the Good Samaritan loves his. Give me eyes that don't look away. Give me hands that don't hold back. And feet that do not turn to the other side of the road. Help me to love others as you have loved me. Let me read that one more time. Just take these words in. Maybe this is the prayer that you make your prayer this week. Dear Jesus, create in me the kind of heart that loves my neighbor the way the Good Samaritan loves his. Give me eyes that don't look away. Give me hands that don't hold back. And feet that do not turn to the other side of the road. Help me to love others as you have loved me. And all God's people said, amen.